Love staying informed? Subscribe now and get unlimited access to local news, weather, and sports for just 99 cents a month for your first 3 months at inforum.news/join. Read every story, listen to every podcast, and download the apps that keep you informed and on the go 24 hours a day. So head to inforum.news/join right now to subscribe. What are you waiting for? Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month at inforum.news/join.
Welcome to Plain Talk, and no guests this Friday. We're going to have lots of guests coming up. Julie Fedorchak, new congressional candidate, is going to be on the show. We'll be talking to her about that. That's exciting. I'm glad she's in the race. I feel like that race is a lot more interesting now, than it was previously. Obviously, we had Tammy Miller on. We're going to have some of these other guests. Probably be time to get Trigby Hammer on. Also, I'm working on getting some of these candidates on. First, obviously, because it's a Republican primary, getting some of the Republican candidates on together to debate and have some conversations and compare and contrast. I'm really hoping that things don't get ugly. I just don't think North Dakota needs that right now. I don't think the North Dakota Republican Party needs that right now. These are smart people. They can disagree on policies. I'm not saying that it all has to be kumbaya. But I would really like to see serious policy debates and not a race to see who can, say the most bad things about woke leftists and socialist presidents and things like that. I don't think that that's a very, however you feel about Joe Biden or wokeism or whatever you want to say, I don't feel like that. Let's get specific. If you want to talk about that stuff, let's put specific policies on the table. What are you talking about? I'm really hoping that's what these primaries are about. I'm afraid I'm not going to get my wish though, Chad.
Yeah, I think that Democrats really need to be looking hard at these races as well. Trigby Hammer, solid candidate. Thought Katrina did a really nice job the other day. If there ends up being a full-on war between factions of the Republican Party, is there a place for a Democrat to sneak in and make some of these races competitive? I get a sense just from sort of the press yesterday that the governor's race certainly will be, attacks on Kelly for being a career politician and some things like that, which I don't think is going to land on Kelly because he is so accessible and he is so, I think I've said it before, he went to Washington, but he didn't go Washington. But I think you're right. I don't think this is going to be a nuanced conversation. I think this is going to be an all-out war. I think there's going to be some TV stations that make a lot of money, Rob. Between now and primary day.
Again, I always joke about this because I'm speaking against interest, but those food fights, they're good. They're good for business for someone like me. It gives me a lot of stuff to write about. Although usually when this stuff's going on, I don't like that stuff. So I kind of try to pick draw the curtain back on the Mac. I hope I do anyway. That's the goal. I don't really like, listen, these candidates spend millions of dollars on these consultants and media company, all the ads and everything they do to try to manipulate the public. I think it's important to remember that. When you're watching these attack ads, they're trying to evoke something in you. And I hope when you're watching them, you sit back and think about, what are they trying to make me feel? And should I feel that way? Is that warranted to feel that way? Those are questions worth asking because the goal here is manipulating you into voting a certain way.
And I think the expense of this, particularly the governor's race, is already starting to show up, right? Tammy Miller has already reserved TV time starting, I think, today through the weekend to introduce herself. Those are not negative ads, I don't believe, but they're introducing her as being a Brigham Trump sort of supporter. So, and it's February 16th, and there's already ads going up on TV. It's going to be a long 4 months, Rob, or a short 4 months, or a great 4 months, depending on your perspective.
Depending on your perspective, yeah. It makes me wonder what happens when we get into the general. You're right. I would like to think there's a point at which Democrats, could find an opening. If for no other reason. I'm saying this not really all that enthusiastic. I thought Katrina Christensen, U.S. Senate candidate, did a great job. I think she's doing a lot better than she did last cycle. I think she would even admit that. Trygve Hammer, I like him. I think he's a good dude. I don't really want either, as a Republican conservative, I don't really want either of them in office. I would like to see them make a Republican candidate work, though. You know,
I think just having competitive races again would be helpful, and I don't blame the candidates. This is more of a national sort of branding issue. But at some point, I think there might be some opportunities for Democrats if this sort of fighting amongst, and I say fighting amongst the wings of the Republican Party, but I would say Tammy Miller and Kelly Armstrong are the same wing of the Republican Party.
Yeah, that's a different. Although obviously, Tammy's play kind of positioning herself as a Trump. I mean, she's obviously angling for one wing of the party, and it's going to be interesting to see if she can capture that, right? Because that wing is not they don't love Doug Burgum, and I don't perceive that they have any particular animosity for Kelly. Now, I say that the current chair of the Republican Party did at one point call for a primary challenge to Armstrong. That's Sandy Sanford. You know, there's been some kind of stuff. You know, Trump himself at one point called for a primary challenge because of Kelly's vote on a censure. I mean, it was just kind of nonsense stuff. I don't know to what degree that can get traction, but the thing is I'm not sure that Tammy Miller is the candidate who makes those things get traction.
Especially if she's tying herself to Burgum, who, I mean, that same group, I think you posted pictures at one point of a picture of him being controlled by Bill Gates, and that's that right-wing part of the party who I don't think loves Doug Burgum very much. The biggest problem Tammy Miller has, however, I got a call last night from somebody who sort of pays attention to politics, probably will vote in the Republican primary. And they said, I thought Brent Sanford was lieutenant governor. Who's this person? I think that's the biggest problem, right? Is that she, and money can take care of that. But she is so unknown amongst the electorate that I think that she's going to have to spend money. She started already today.
I think one of the problems is, because money's also not a magic. I mean, you're right. It can do a lot to help raise the name ID of a candidate and to get them in there. And she has to do it. She's doing the right thing at this point. I think one thing to keep in mind, though, is that money can saturate a media market like North Dakota very, very quickly. Right. Kelly's going to be making spends of his own. Money's not going to be the difference maker in this race. I think both of them can easily spend at a level on such a short timeline and in such a small media market to where it's just saturated. And it's not. And I'm thinking about this if we go back to the 2018 election, where Heidi Heitkamp kind of did that. Saturated the market, and she had so much more money than Kevin Cramer, and she spent, I think about 4 times more than Kevin Cramer, 3 or 4 times more. I don't remember the math now, but I mean, it reached a point of diminishing for returns for her, where it just wasn't moving the needle anymore because people have seen it all. I mean, it reached a point. I would argue Doug Burgum and his mailers, when he was sort of dabbling in legislative races, and it just reached a point where people are opening it and like they're half a dozen mailers are falling out of their mailbox every time they open it. They're not paying attention anymore. So there's a danger in that too. I mean, it can't just be, carpet bomb people with messaging. That reaches a point of diminishing returns very quickly.
Yeah, the first million is the most important million. After that, it probably doesn't matter as much. But I would say in the Heitkamp race, that was so late, though. I mean, the big chunk of her money came in after the Kavanaugh vote. And so, it is a little bit different situation that this money is going to be spread out over a longer period of time. But I think the biggest point is I don't believe Kelly Armstrong is going to be outspent by Tammy Miller. And I don't believe Tammy Miller is going to be outspent by Kelly Armstrong. No. It's not like there's going to be one message in a vacuum. No. And I also think that unlike 2016, Kelly will hit back, unlike Wayne did. Wayne really, Stenjum didn't want to go into negative campaigning, and I don't think effectively defended himself. I don't think that's going to be the case this time.
So the other thing, I wanted to switch gears. We're talking about this a little bit, but something caught my eye. And this is a little bit international, not really something we touch on. But to me, I saw a through line through this all the way home, and I wanted to see what you were thinking about this, Chad. Alexei Navalny died, and for people who don't know, he's a internationally renowned political dissident in Russia. He was started as an an anti-corruption crusader against Putin's regime, Vladimir Putin's regime. Ended up leaving Russia for a while because he was in danger. Felt like he had to return to Russia. There's a great documentary out there called Navalny. If you haven't watched it, it's worth your time. Really tells the story well. Went back to Russia, was arrested on charges related to political extremism, right? The extremism, of course, being he was opposed to Putin's regime. He just died in prison. At the same time, Tucker Carlson's been over in Russia. Just did a softball interview with Vladimir Putin, where basically allowed the Russian president to expound on all his propaganda points for hours with little pushback. And then Carlson's been, like, he visited a subway station. He said, oh, crime's so low in Moscow. Moscow's better than any American city. I mean, these are things that he's saying. And I was writing a column just before I came on. And the reason, the through line I see connecting this to North Dakota is that millions of Americans believe the things that Tucker Carlson says. So much so that, I mean, I wasn't sure if, for instance, the Senate just had a recent vote on aid for Ukraine. And there's a lot of Republicans who are lining up against that. I was surprised. I mean, I wasn't sure that Kevin Cramer and John Hoeven were going to vote for it. Because, you know, sort of if you're in Trump world, if both of them have endorsed Donald Trump, you don't support Ukraine. So, I mean, I guess there are a lot of people who buy, including a lot of North Dakotans who buy the things that Tucker Carlson is saying. And in the same, you know, sort of set of headlines, I see this article from the Associated Press about this group called True the Vote, which, if you don't know this, they did the quote-unquote research, and I'm using that term loosely, that was used in the Dinesh D'Souza film 2,000 Mules about, you know, the supposed stolen election, specifically in Georgia. Well, True the Vote had filed complaints in Georgia saying that they had all this evidence of ballot stuffing and everything else. And Georgia officials said, well, we can't find that evidence. Why don't you provide it to us? Like, who's talking to you? Please, you know, you're alleging that crimes were committed and that it subverted the election outcome in our state. Please tell us. And the group refused. And so, you know, Georgia's election officials didn't take it lying down. They went to the group. They got a court order. The court ordered them to turn over the evidence. And it turns out True the Vote didn't have any evidence. Now, I say this because 2,000 Mules was promoted here in North Dakota. It was promoted by talk radio hosts and other pundits and social media people right here in North Dakota. In fact, it was promoted by the chairperson on a ballot measure committee that is promoting what they're calling the Election Integrity Act. They're out collecting signatures for it right now. She promoted the film in emails to lawmakers. She has 3 sitting lawmakers on her sponsoring committee.
Rob, who are those 3 lawmakers?
It is, and I don't have them right. It's Representative Scott Deek. Okay. Representative Scott Deek, Jeff Hoverson, Representative Jeff Hoverson from Minot, Representative Jeff Magrum from Hazleton, all Republicans, obviously.
Senator Jeff Magrum.
Senator. Well, he used to be a rep. Senator Jeff Magrum. But so I mean, the thing is that's happening right here in North Dakota. In October, there was an Emerson College poll, and it made headlines because, you know, part of the poll was that Doug Burgum's approval numbers were kind of surprisingly low, like 38%. But in that same poll, it said that a plurality of North Dakotans, 44% of North Dakotans, believe that Joe Biden stole the 2020 election. Now, again, this doesn't have anything to do with how you feel about Joe Biden or anything else. This has to do with just a basic agreement on the facts. Like, people don't believe the election was stolen because they're watching films like 2,000 Mules. They're believing people like Dinesh D'Souza and Mike Lindell and all the people who, you know, all the influencers and the talk radio hosts and everything else that line up and regurgitate the things that they're saying. This is happening here in North Dakota. These are not fringe beliefs. Not when a plurality of North Dakotans believe them. These are not fringe things. And I'm just wondering, like, is there going to come a point where people just understand you are being lied to? And the people who are lying to you, I think, like Tucker Carlson, I don't even think believe their lies. I don't think Tucker Carlson is an idiot. I think he's actually a brilliant person. I think he's a very good writer, a very skilled broadcaster. It's just that he's arrived at a point in his career where he's willing to tell you things he knows aren't true for profit.
Rob, there is so much there for me to respond to.
I know. I'm sorry. I kind of, and the thing was, I was writing about this. In fact, I was almost late logging on for the podcast because I was writing about this, but this is on my mind, and I don't like. I think I realize that Alexei Navalny. I mean that's something that happened far from North Dakota, but the reverberations are here. I mean this stuff matters.
So let me just say, I think to think that the leader of the Republican Party and Donald Trump is pro-Putin, is pro-Russia. Rob, if we would have been having a conversation 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 40 years ago, and talking about the leader of the Republican Party is in bed with the Russian dictator, think about how far that party has moved. It seems like Tucker Carlson, Donald Trump, and this fringe of the party are the only people who have not figured out that Putin's a bad dude.
But they're
He's
not the
real
fringe.
bad dude.
I'm not sure they're the fringe though. I mean, not when you have enough of not when they have enough of a faction in the Republican caucus and Congress that they can hold up funding to Ukraine. Right. And you start thinking about, I mean, why does Donald Trump hate Ukraine so much? Well, because Ukraine wouldn't play ball with him when he asked Ukraine to turn over supposed evidence about Joe Biden and Hunter Biden's corruption. And I'm not defending Joe Biden and Hunter Biden at all. I'm just saying, if you believe that they did bad things, you should want truthful, factual things.
And Rob, to that point, the reason I asked who the three legislators were, because I think it's important that we name names. And when I think about the fact that those three guys consistently get elected, maybe there is something wrong with our elections. But I think
Deekson is first. Is it?
Yeah, well, whatever. The point is,
fair enough.
I will tell you an anecdotal story. I was in Las Vegas 2 or 3 weeks ago for a meeting, and I happened to be in the same hotel as the Charlie Kirk, what are they?
Turning Point USA.
Turning Point was having a meeting. And Mike Lindell was there and all these folks. And I overheard conversations about none of them ever trusted, you don't trust the RNC, don't trust the way our elections are run, whatever. But I also saw at least one North Dakota legislator there walking around with these guys, talking to My Pillow guy and other things. So to your point,
name names.
This isn't a fringe.
Name names. Who'd you see?
This is Jim Casper.
Yeah, Representative Jim Casper, Republican from Fargo.
Yeah, and so like you're probably right. This isn't some fringe. Unfortunately, this has become a pretty prominent position of a pro-Russia. I mean, it defies logic. I think about the Cold War, man. What would Ronald Reagan be thinking right now?
Right. I mean, we're in a position where Ronald Reagan is probably more likely to be praised by a Democrat right now than a Republican, right? Because Reagan was I don't know what you want, a neocon, interventionist. They don't really like Reagan that much, as much as he was a sort of totem. And I mean, listen, even they got to a point where Republicans were, I mean, the Reagan era was over and Republicans had to move on and find new coalitions and new things. But you can't discount the man's work, at least not on that front. He was instrumental. He didn't bring down the Soviet Union by himself, but gosh, he sure helped. And the messaging you go back and read what some of the things that Ronald Reagan said about America being the shining city on the hill and being a place where the unwanted and the unloved from around the world could come and find a place and become Americans too. That sort of thing has no place in this Republican Party right now. They don't want to hear it. They don't want people. They don't want America to be the shining city on the hill. They don't want immigration. They don't want those people to come in.
And to think about, again, going to Russia and sort of propping up and being friendly with Putin, I mean, a guy who imprisons his political enemies and kills them.
Right.
Is that the model we want? And maybe it is. I mean, we've heard from Trump that he wants to be a dictator, and I'm not suggesting he's going to kill his opponents. But when you suggest you want to be a dictator, at least for a day, at some point we have to believe what he's telling us.
I mean, I remember, and I mean, right now, Donald Trump himself is on trial, and it's fine. I remember in 2016 when he was campaigning against Hillary Clinton, and it was lock her up, right? That's talking about jailing a political rival right there. And now I guess they could say, oh, well, Donald Trump, they're doing the same thing to him because he's on trial for all these things. But yeah, he did stuff. Right? Yeah. I mean, that also speaks like, oh, well, we're putting a political rival on the law. Okay, yeah, the other side of that coin is nobody's above the law, including former presidents.
Right. And that's the biggest problem is that in their eyes, he can do no wrong, right? Because any sort of prosecution is political prosecution. Any sort of suggestions that he did something wrong. I mean, it's it's the blind faithfulness of the whole thing. I've liked a lot of politicians in my day, Rob, but the idea of going outside and putting a flag on my car year round and saying that he did not lose or F his opponent or whatever, it's never something that's ever it's never I should try to do that just to see what the response would be when I came home with a political flag in my car. It's fandom.
If you find yourself in a political movement that's organized around a person and not a set of ideas, then you're not in a political movement, you're in a cult. That's a fundamental difference, because especially because the movement, you could tell the Trump movement is not organized around ideas, because when Trump shifts on an idea, the movement shifts. It's about whatever's good for Trump that day. I mean, all of a sudden Trump starts running down tough abortion laws, and all the pro-lifers and evangelicals are like, oh, okay, we'll just go along with it. I mean, one day, hating Bud Light is an article of faith, but then Trump holds a fundraiser with an Anheuser-Busch lobbyist and says, and starts saying, oh, maybe Bud Light's not so bad, and everybody just goes along with it. I was never on board with boycotting Bud Light for just trying to sell their beer to gay people or trans people. I don't care.
A customer is a customer. Welcome to capitalism, guys.
It doesn't bother me. I wasn't drinking Bud Light to begin with, but whatever. I don't understand. I was never on board with it. But if you were on board with it, and then Trump turns his back on it, and you just abandon all the things that you believed before and just follow Trump, that is scary to me. That is terrifying.
Don't you think that when you think about the evangelical vote, I mean, it really is, paying off a porn star, multiple divorces, all the different things that Trump has done, but the evangelical vote is still there with him, strong. Don't you think they're more blindly following him than they are the Bible? Don't you think at some point that there has to be something going on in these folks' head where they actually believe that Trump is like a tool for God, or put here to? I mean, you almost have to, because otherwise they don't believe in anything.
Yeah. Let's flip. I mean, because the last thing I wanted to, the other thing that's in the headlines in North Dakota is this the Dakota Access Pipeline lawsuit. North Dakota's going to trial in front of federal judge Daniel Traynor, and it's about a lawsuit where the state of North Dakota wants the federal government to reimburse us for costs. I think that the DAPL protests for a lot of North Dakotans were a radicalizing event. And I say that, we talk a lot about why, North Dakotans or Americans having lost their faith in institutions. They don't believe anything anymore. Well, think about this. This is 2016. This is pre-pandemic. This is pre-Trump getting elected, right? 2016, a lot of people probably didn't believe he was going to be elected. I didn't believe he was going to be elected. So this is before all that. And you have this protest going on for months in south central North Dakota. It's very violent. It's making national headlines. A lot of the national media that came in was patently unfair to our local communities and local law enforcement. I'm not saying that law enforcement did everything right. The protesters didn't do everything right. It was violent. It was ugly. It was complex. And we didn't get a lot of nuanced coverage. And in amongst all of that was the fact that you had hundreds, sometimes thousands of protesters camping illegally on federal ground. And the Obama administration, who were still in office at the time, did nothing about it. They refused. They could have moved the protesters off that land. I mean, that was the base of operations. That was where these daily attacks on private property, on law enforcement, and everything were being launched from. There were North Dakotans who watched that. And regardless of how you feel about pipelines or the oil industry or water rights or any of that stuff, they watched criminal activity happening over and over again, and the federal government refusing to do anything about it. And by the way, meanwhile, leaving North Dakota on its own. So North Dakota puts out a call to other states, right? Other sheriffs and other states to send highway patrol, to send deputies, to send officers to come help us because we were overwhelmed. And, deploying the National Guard is, deploying the military on a political protest is, that was a Rubicon state leaders understandably didn't want to cross. then we had left-wing leaders in other states saying, don't send your people to North Dakota. Don't help them out. I don't know how you feel about this, Chad, but I think for a lot of North Dakotans, and I'm not necessarily endorsing the direction they've gone, I think that was a radicalizing event. For people in our part of the world, that was where I think that was part of where a lot of them lost faith. And then we go into the pandemic era and the shutdowns and everything else. But I don't think, that was a pivot point in my mind.
I think when I think back to that time and living in Bismarck, obviously 70 miles away from it or whatever, I remember being frustrated at the sort of the coverage of it, and it being sort of depending on whose eyes you were looking through, right? You saw, I would talk to my progressive friends around the world, or not around the country, not around the world, but who are like, oh, this great thing is happening there. What a wonderful thing. And I'd be like, well, this isn't playing out exactly on the ground the way you think it is. But on the flip side, the way even you just described it, where there was like the central camp where they were going to do this illegal activity every day, the folks that I know that were down at the camp, a lot of it was like peaceful, good, nice stuff. So it wasn't like there was this.
That part existed. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think anytime, like, once it became a national thing, and there were people coming in from around the country to join it and maybe even radicalize it even a little bit more than maybe it started out. I remember the first news story I saw about this camp. It was like a dozen people, from Standing Rock, just sort of there. And then it grew and it grew and it grew. I will tell you, I remember a group of folks walking through downtown Bismarck. And I know a lot of people in North Dakota. I know a lot of people in the progressive movement. It was hundreds of people walking through. I didn't recognize one person. Right. So, I think a lot of that radicalization was coming from outside forces. But I do agree that people in Bismarck and the surrounding communities who were frustrated at the length of this, were frustrated about some of the stuff that were happening to the ranchers down there and whatever. And I do think it was sort of it was another event that sort of put folks in two different camps, us versus them, sort of thing. Do I think the Obama administration should have done something at that time? Maybe looking back 8 years later, but it would have been a powder keg from the left, right, to go and do something. And before I go back to you, I do think the Burgum administration, when they came in after the 2016 election, really did a great job of not only just trying to talk things, but they sent bodies down there and had one-on-one conversations and really did a good job of dispersing this thing, which again,
although in fairness to Dalrymple, by that point, I feel like the tribe was pretty fed up. At that point, if you remember, tribal chairman at the time, David Archambault, started telling people to leave. Burgum had some win. I'm not undermining anything Burgum said. I just don't want to necessarily throw dirt on Jack Dalrymple, who was dealing with it at a different period of the event. Also, North Dakota's weather helped drive a lot of people out. Camping out in December on the plains in North Dakota is a good way to die if you don't know what you're doing. So anyway, and you're right. It was nuanced and it was complex. Some of the stuff was like, well, there were peaceful people in the camp. You're right. There were people who just was there for a cause, whatever else. There were also peaceful people at January 6th. Right. And it's not, not everybody crashed the Capitol or wanted to crash the Capitol, but a lot of them did. And it's hard to draw distinctions between the two. So I'm not talking about people. I'm not saying that they were radicalized or terrible because they oppose the pipeline or have politics that are different than mine. But when you're, slingshotting lug nuts at cops and throwing Molotov cocktails, I'm sorry. I'm not going to defend that. And that was happening daily.
Yeah, and I don't want to suggest that I was defending it either.
Right. No, I know you were.
I also think that there was the sort of Hollywood celebrity element of all of it. You've got this community that's largely ignored by everybody in the state and out of the state. And all of a sudden you have like Hollywood actors and musicians coming down
Mark
to
Ruffalo,
the camp. And there was,
and
there
Tom
was
Morello.
Sort of this I'm living in Standing Rock and I all of a sudden have all these famous people coming down that have been ignoring me, there is some celebrity element of that as well. That I don't think helped the protest at all.
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I hope people listening to this are understanding the connections I'm trying to draw between all of these things. But I mean, I have been grappling to the point. I mean, I get accused daily of having Trump derangement syndrome and being obsessed and everything else. And I mean, I don't know what I'm supposed to do when I'm in the business of hopefully illuminating, local, regional, even world events sometimes for my readership, when 44% of North Dakotans think the election was stolen. No, it wasn't. And those same people are trying to make changes to North Dakota's election laws, making claims about North Dakota's election outcomes. I mean, it worries me that such an influential political movement is predicated on things that are fundamentally untrue. And I don't know what to do but to just keep shouting about it and saying, no, this is not true. This is false. Stop it.
Well, Rob, one of my frustrations as somebody left of center who just wants normalcy back in our country and in our state, one of my frustrations is seeing incumbent legislators or others who are being challenged by this far right.
Right.
And then wanting independents or left of center people to help them in the primary defeat these far right people, while at the same time endorsing Donald Trump, or sort of like embracing that when it's convenient for them. But then when it comes back to bite them, it's like, oh no, I need your help. I need your help to save us from ourselves here. That frustrates me, because I think a lot of what we're seeing in these legislative primaries and other places, it was brought upon by traditional Republicans not standing up to the Trump wing of things moving forward, and it got out of control, and now it's coming back to bite them.
Well, that's one of the things. It was so interesting to me that John Hoeven and Kevin Cramer voted for Ukraine aid, because increasingly they're the exception in the Republican Party, right? And it's frustrating to me because it's hard because Cramer has never given me any reason to believe. But I look at it, I don't understand how he can be such an enthusiastic supporter of Donald Trump, but then turn around and vote to certify the election, or as Hoeven did, as Kelly Armstrong did, or vote for aid in Ukraine as Hoeven and Cramer have done in the past and just did recently. I'm sure Armstrong will as well, because that's certainly been his expressed position on that issue. I don't understand how they can reconcile that with supporting Donald Trump. And the only thing I can come up with is that they're afraid, right? They're voting for the right thing when they're called on to do it, but they're afraid to stand up and say that the person who's opposed to supporting Ukraine, the person who's promoting a stolen election nonsense and undermining trust in our democracy, our democratic system of government, is okay to put in the White House again. And they don't want to upset that 44% of North Dakotans who think the election was stolen and who like Tucker Carlson, and et cetera, et cetera.
And then you take it a step further. It's 44% of North Dakotans, and what percentage Republican primary voters?
Right.
I would guess north of 50.
Sure.
And so it is a very difficult thing. But at some point, I try to understand the political reality of what these guys are facing and whatever, but do they then have to own that Trump's making fun of Nikki Haley's husband for not being on the campaign trail because, I don't know, he's serving our country? Do they have to own that? Do they have to own all the other stuff that he does on the daily that is just out of bounds? Suggesting that we're going to withhold NATO money, and it's just like we heard it from Tammy Miller that the country is foreign policy so much better under Trump. It feels like that's not necessarily true in some cases. When you're in bed with Russia and hate Ukraine and fighting with NATO, that doesn't feel like stability to me.
Well, it doesn't. That's all the time we have for today, though. I hope that I realize we didn't have a guest today. This is just stuff that's been in the back of my mind, and I was writing about it. By the time this is up, that column will probably be online too. I hope you go take a look at it. It really bothers me, and I don't know how we get there. I don't think I think there's room to say, to disagree over what our policy towards Ukraine should be. I'm not saying that there's not good faith arguments to be made. Ukraine's got its own problems. Ukraine's got corruption. We could disagree on pipelines and Ukraine and all of these things, but there's fundamental things that are true that we have to agree on because they're facts. And there's a massive ecosystem, political media, everything else, that influencers, social media, that's all put together that is just selling people lies, and they're profiting from it, and it's wrong, and it's not going to stop until it's not a top-down problem, it's a bottom-up problem. It's not until these guys are no longer rewarded for telling their lies, it's not going to stop. So I guess we'll leave it there. Thank you, by the way, to whoever's review bombing us on Apple. I don't know. I sent that over. All of a sudden, we got like 20 new reviews on Apple, and they were all 1-star reviews. And a couple of them on there that it's this is an echo chamber, and Rob's guests and no mention of you. And they must not be listening. They don't understand the implications of the Chad Oban bump because you didn't get mentioned at all.
Yeah, but they know it's probably all the lefties who are just support me out there. Actually, no, I get more crap from lefties for being on this podcast with you than I do anybody else. So well, I get plenty of my own crap. But thank you. I mean, I guess thanks for listening, or maybe try listening before you leave a review next time. There you go. Listen to a podcast before you leave your comments. That's the way it's supposed to work. Listen, then comment.
I will say we got a surge of ratings on Spotify as well, and our rating went up, so that was nice.
Really?
Yeah. So I don't know what happened. I have a feeling somebody on a forum somewhere probably targeted. That happens from time to time. Anyway, if you're listening to this, leave us an honest review. If you honestly don't like the show, why are you still listening? First of all, but second of all, just leave that, I guess, if that's your honest review. But if you would
remember, if you don't like something, it's Rob's fault. If you like something, it's Chad's credit.
Yeah, I'll go with that. Sure, that's fine. I'll take the blame. Everybody hates Rob anyway. All right, thanks you so much for listening. We'll talk again. Did you know Forum Communications Company has a robust podcast library? At inforum.com/podcasts, we have everything from politics, sports, true crime, outdoor adventure, and more. Visit inforum.com/podcasts and explore them all today.